forget that no government schemes are going to perfect man. We know that living in this world means dealing with what philosophers would call the phenomenology of evil, or as theologians would put it, the doctrine of sin. There is sin and evil in the world, and we're enjoined by Scripture and the Lord Jesus to oppose it with all our might.
Coming to you live from the corner of Fauci and Burns on Constitution on Fire Avenue, it's the America Held Hostage Podcast. America's Constitution in Quarantine. Now here are your hosts, Jeff Dornik and Jon Hinton.
Once again, sliding into the anchor seat on the America Held Hostage Podcast, I'm Jon Hinton for another edition of AHH. So glad to be with you once again, and alongside me is my partner in crime, sitting in for Jeff Dornik once again, JJ Knight, Joshua Jacob Knight. JJ, glad to have you back on the podcast yet again. Round two, as we're going for broke today, but we have more news to get to. So unless you have anything to add to say hi, let's get started.
No, let's get on it.
All right. First story comes to us from former New York Times reporter Alex Berenson, who has been tweeting up a storm talking about what has been happening that has not been reported by the mass media. Miami-Dade reports a 6% antibody infection rate, 165,000 cases. The 15-time active infection figure in the article is an understatement, as the tests took 2 weeks to carry out in Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade has under 300 deaths. That means that they have a 0.2% death rate. Follow that up with another tweet and a link to a story. That story that Alex Berenson linked to was from the Miami Herald. Follow that up with another tweet that Alex Berenson linked to a new study from the University of Southern California and the LA Department of Public Health, saying an antibody study shows that 4% of Los Angeles has already been infected, with a clear explanation. Infections from the new coronavirus are far more widespread, and the fatality rate is much lower in LA County than previously thought. That is according to publichealth.lacounty.gov. They estimate that the true infection rate in Los Angeles was 28 to 55 times greater than the reported rate, which is similar to the Stanford study that we've alluded to earlier, which we will touch on in this tweet storm. Anybody who claims the Stanford study got it wrong somehow is basically a zero, he says. They don't quite come out and say it's time for an end to the lockdowns, but they do say this. The estimates suggest we should rethink and recalibrate our disease prediction modeling and our public health strategies. I would say, you think? Also from Alex Berenson. He tweeted, the Stanford antibody testing is also out. It estimates that 3% of people in Santa Clara County, California, have been infected and already recovered, which means that 50 plus times the estimate of confirmed active cases are already in the public. That's more evidence that the SARS-2 coronavirus is far more widespread and thus far less dangerous and less deadly than previously expected and reported. Another study that I linked to in my tweet storm about this came to us from the Boston Globe. We alluded to this earlier, but I want to come back to it again. The Boston Globe reports a Boston University study says that nearly a third of 200 blood samples taken in the Chelsea area of Boston show exposure to coronavirus. The highest documented seropositive rate the world has seen, 200 random sample in Chelsea, Massachusetts, 32% test positive for antibodies. That's unprecedented. So I would agree with Steve Deace when he said doctors that are actually seeing coronavirus patients and are responsible for half the testing in their own county are calling BS on President Fauci, who now has had 5 different opinions on the virus since January, hasn't seen a single patient, but is supposedly an infallible expert, just like Jesus or the Pope. JJ, what are your thoughts on all that right now as we stand this afternoon?
Well, thought number 1, no man is infallible, Pope included. 2, yeah, we said this from the beginning. There can't look. Governor overreach is one thing, but federal overreach is out of control. Well, we're now having 2 people, 3 decide to continue the lockdowns, and they want to do the graduated in system starting in May, but that ownership's on them. Again, I've mentioned this before, maybe not, but J.B. Pritzker at least operated within Illinois' Constitution. There's a line in there about public safety stopping even from going to church. Now, he didn't stop people from attending as the Chicago mayor did, but he stopped them from being inside the enclosed space where the virus lives, and he's allowed to do that. But most governors are reaching way over that, and the federal government's reaching way over that. And now we're getting real data back, and the counties and local people who should have more power in our federated system than the governor, and the governor should have more power than the president, aren't making the decisions. And so we need to start using that real data.
I would agree. I would completely agree. The data is showing us that this is far more widespread than what was previously predicted. The predicted data modeling has been false the entire time, or it's been unreliable. And I would say it is false because you based it on data from the World Health Organization and from China, who now have been proven to have lied to you. So
can I chime in there real quick?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. This is to back up what we said in the previous podcast. The WHO has become corrupted there. It's very clear. You should see that interview. We need to link to that interview where the guy hangs up and denies Taiwan over and over again. Mm-hmm. But even if they do come out with accurate data or models now, they're not going to be trusted, which makes things even worse. So we can't trust them in the first place because they're kowtowing to China or the environmental guy at the Imperial College. And now if they're giving us great data, we can't trust it. So it makes the situation worse. Sorry to butt in there.
No, you're fine. I think I think the trolling has begun on Wuhan, China, and also the World Health Organization, as I saw on Fox News Sunday that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy called it the Wuhan Health Organization. I thought that was quite delicious in and of itself. But let's continue. CNBC reports that massive layoffs and pay cuts are likely coming to state and local governments as federal aid goes elsewhere. The key points from this article from CNBC, which was published last Wednesday, says state and local governments are warning of a wave of layoffs and pay cuts after getting left out of the federal coronavirus relief package expected to pass in Congress this week, which it did. It passed in the Senate on Wednesday. It passed in the House on Thursday. It was signed into law Thursday night, an additional $500 billion to help bring economic relief to businesses that have been affected by the coronavirus shutdowns and the economic house arrest that you are now under. In many places, such as Detroit and Los Angeles, those painful reductions in staff are already taking shape. State and local governments received aid under the $2.2 trillion CARES Act signed late last month, but they are pleading for new relief as Congress prepares to pass a bill to help small businesses and hospitals. Some highlights from this story, and then I want your take on this before I add my thoughts, JJ. Los Angeles plans to force city workers to spend 26 days on unpaid leave as revenues are forecasted to drop as much as $600 million over the next fiscal year. Detroit has proposed laying off 200 workers and furloughing thousands more. And in Ohio's Hamilton County Commissioner Denise Dreyhaus is taking a 10% pay cut along with county workers. She says, quote, "We are really struggling." Your thoughts on that, JJ, because we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. And I think that we're going to find out that the cure was much far worse than the disease.
Let's put it in terms maybe everyone can understand. If you're forcing people to stay home and now take 26 days of a month of unpaid leave, effectively, more than a month, really, because it's work days, and then furloughs and other stuff on top of that. How are they going to pay for that health care if they do get sick? How are they going to take care of all that? How are they going to put food on the table? You think they're going to stick around for 30 days when what was the number? Less than a 25%, 24% of Americans have more than $1,000 in the bank, something like that.
40% of Americans, according to CNBC, 40% of Americans only have $1,000 in savings as an emergency fund, and less than 40%, 34% live paycheck to paycheck.
So you're talking 2/3 of Americans won't be able to go more. The month is.
I was
gone.
wrong. Switch those numbers. Those numbers. It's 40% live paycheck to paycheck. Only 34% have $1,000 in savings. So
you're talking.
But either way,
you're talking 2/3 roughly. Let's just round it. 2/3 roughly. That month off, they're screwed, and it's going to be more than that. And your food shortage is coming, and we'll talk about that later on this. And everybody's on lockdown, and some governors, and we'll talk on this later, are going Emperor Palpatine level control, and they're going to move. They're going to do whatever they can. Screw your restrictions. If this guy's going to pay me and put food on the table, bye. It isn't even going to be a violent uprising. It's just going to be a mass exodus.
Well, we've already seen the case. If you saw the moving data from Atlas Moving Van Lines, they said that the number one exodus state, people moving out of the state, was New Jersey last year, according to their data. And they're moving to places like Florida and Texas, or places in the South that have less draconian means. They have less taxes, and they have lower cost of living, and they can provide for themselves better. The thing is that relates to the fact that if we're now being told by economic advisors, which we alluded to in the last podcast, that a White House economic advisor came out Sunday morning on Fox News Sunday saying they expect unemployment to reach Great Depression levels now. Remember, in the Great Depression, you and I both remember it because we've heard the stories from our grandparents. People had to move to where the jobs were. People had to move to where they could find the food and to where they could provide for their families. I think you're going to see that again. A lot of people are going to move from one state to another because they're not going to be able to feed their families, and they're going to have to escape places that have these draconian means in order to just get by.
Right. And 2 points to add to that, you're going to see a move to more rural type places. Like right now, I'm in a city of like not even 10,000, and there's some for sale signs going up. But when the measures start lifting or go too long, whichever comes first, I bet it starts filling in around here and out in these small towns that were once dying and ghosting. And then two, even when they moved in the Great Depression, I remember my grandmother telling me, you'd have one pair of shoes and you'd wear them to church and you'd wear them to school. Sometimes you'd go barefoot to school. And if you weren't doing that, when you were on the farm, your feet were literally ankle deep, barefoot in horse poop or pig poop or whatever your animal was. And most people had to learn to provide for themselves. So it's not even going to be easy once they move. So
It's true. It's true. I think that you are going to see an exodus of people leaving these places and moving out to the suburbs, moving to more rural areas, because why would you stay if you can do your work remotely? Why would you stay in a place that is going to be full of turmoil? Or if you can't work remotely and you don't have a job, why would you stay in a place where you are going to continue to struggle when you could move somewhere and actually provide for yourself? I think that that's something to watch out for. Sadly, over the next 18 to 36 months, there's going to be a great shift, not only in our economy, but also in the movement of people. Because if you think that this is going to be a V-shaped recovery and we're going to come back in the third quarter, you're gravely mistaken. You're going to have food shortages. We're going to allude to that in another article that are going to be coming in about 6 weeks. And people need to be prepared. We talked about that in the last podcast, but we're going to reiterate it. You need to be prepared for the fact that hard times are coming. And if you have money set aside, if you have food stocked up, you're going to be better off than a lot of people, especially if you're in places that are in middle America. You're going to be better off than people that are along the coasts, because that's where the suffering is going to be more prevalent and where you're going to see more civil unrest. But we will allude to that and get to that later. TMZ reporting, this is in your backyard, JJ, so I want your thoughts on this. 1,000 people attended a Chicago house party during the coronavirus pandemic. Worried about what? So if you had any doubt, cases of coronavirus are about to explode because of reckless conduct, check out this video and all the doubts will be swiftly erased. Now, I disagree with that, but this is TMZ. They're out of Hollywood. They're going to pimp you the fear porn. But 1,000 people ignored stern warnings of doctors and scientists in a city that's been ravaged by the virus and jammed into a house on the west side of Chi-Town. You can see in this video what looks like 100 people in just one room dancing as music blares in the background. The rest of the house was also packed with people, so it goes without saying, but there's no visible social distancing. One of the partygoers told MTO News, "I'm not worried about coronavirus, but if I didn't have it before, I probably got it now. Oh well." Fact is, things are coming apart at the seams. Scores of Los Angelinos in California were out and about on Saturday, and anecdotally, we can confirm the majority were not wearing masks. And I would say to TMZ, you look good there in your brown shirt, you Gestapo bunch.
Now we've covered this, John. The Gestapo wore black, the SS wore brown.
Either way, they reported on their citizens and made their way of life absolute hell.
It's actually more like fascist under Mussolini, Italy, because you got rewarded for ratting people out in Italy. I don't know if you knew that. There was an old comedy that made fun of it. Betray your family and friends. Fabulous prizes to be won. But
you be praised by the crowd outside of Lot's house, the social media mob that is now crying out, "Great is Diana, Artemis of the Ephesians," like they did for 2 hours in Ephesus when they tried to burn Paul in an effigy in the book of Acts. You too can win prizes and be praised by the social media Gestapo mob if you report on people not wearing masks, not socially distancing, and saying, "Screw it, coronavirus or die."
Yeah. So 2 things there. One, you totally just spoiled what I was going to say later about Michigan's governor. was totally going to just say Diana, greatest Diana, Artemis of the Ephesians. But we'll move on. I digress. In all seriousness, though, in like Chicago inside, if you were outside having a street party and you were distancing in a hot zone, okay, we know outside in the sunlight it dies in what, 90 seconds, 60, a minute,
Yes.
a minute and a half. So yeah, play, whatever, you can do it. People are doing it here on my street. There's 4 or 5 of them out front of their house. And actually, am I going to be fully honest? I'm kind of glad to see that returned. That people are just getting together in front of their house and talking, because normally it's just dead here. I'm the only one outside ever. Before this all started. That's just a side note. But crowding into a house, though, I get it. You want to F the man, but come on.
Well, you know what? Like I said to some haters on Twitter, if you're going to pimp my body, my choice when it comes to aborting babies, isn't it my body, my choice if I want to take on coronavirus?
Fair enough. That's a fair
point. If you want to self-quarantine, you can stay home and be miserable. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to live my life because I want my constitutional rights back, and you're not the boss of me. But let's move on.
Right.
The Missouri pork plant that you sent me this story about, the New York Times is saying that Smithfield Foods, a Missouri pork plant, their workers say that they can't cover their mouths to cough, to which I would say, why are you not having surgical masks be worn by the workers, which would cover their mouths so that they can cough while they're on the pork processing or meat processing assembly lines? Common sense, people. Just common sense.
I agree.
So
I don't understand.
A lawsuit against Smithfield Foods claiming that it has created a public nuisance by failing to protect its workers from the coronavirus. What are your thoughts on this story, Josh?
Well, first of all, this comes after how many Springfield food plants are closed down?
At least 2 in South Dakota. I believe 1 in Iowa. We know of 2 more chicken producing plants that have been shut down, poultry producing plants that have been shut down in Iowa as well. And now we're finding out that 1/3 of all pork production in the country has grinded to a halt as of this weekend.
You know what? It's just stupid. It's like, why wouldn't they have masks and proper protective gear before all this started? Now, I think everywhere they're required to give protective gear to anybody who's working in a quote unquote essential job, which food is listed as essential. It's just, I don't even want, whatever. It's stupid. And they get the lawsuit. I understand the people coming forward, and you should ask for proper protection. If you're not allowed to cover your hand to cough or whatever, because you're going to miss one piece of meat on an assembly line, that is slave labor.
Well, we do know that when it comes to work that's done by those with large rap sheets or here by illegal means, and they do it for below living wages, when it comes to that type of work, if you want to find it in droves, you're going to find it in meat processing facilities, and I know that on a first-hand basis. But let's continue. A story from Boston.com says that from the Massachusetts State Department of Health, this from Boston.com tells us that 97.5% of all deaths in Massachusetts that were deemed COVID-19 deaths, 97.5% of those deaths had pre-existing conditions. Matches up with the data in New York City, which is also 97%. Every death is terrible, but we know who is now the most vulnerable. That's what we've been saying on the podcast as we now enter our 4th week. JJ, you protect the immunocompromised, you protect the elderly, those with pre-existing conditions. The rest of us need to go back to effing work.
Yeah, it needs to get surgical. And I and I'm going to say this again, like, JB is starting to do that. The president's thing is wanting to starting to do that, although I think both are going too slow. Let me state that. They need to speed it up. And it does need to be surgical. I have a partially compromised immune system, and I work in healthcare. I'm going to be wearing a mask outside in public when I'm around other people, probably as a secondhand nature for the rest of my life, given all the crap that's going on by the time this is over. The elderly care facilities, and we'll touch on this later, the death rate in Illinois at those facilities is atrocious. And my grandmother lives at one, and I can't go visit her. And as soon as one person gets sick in there, it's terrible. Great. Be hardcore there. Be the watcher on the wall there. Don't come into a healthy family that doesn't have any young children, doesn't have anybody who's immunocompromised, and say you can't work, you can't feed them because you might get them sick over there. And you can't see me. I'm pointing way over there, away from my house. And it needs to get surgical. And I use the word common sense, but you know what? It doesn't exist. We let that go a long time. It flew out the window a long time ago. We need to get back to principles. And I'm not even going to use the word conservative. I'm going to use Christian-centric, Christ-centric principles that are logical and make sense. And it's stupid. It's stupid on display of stupid in stupid land. Stupid America,
It's so true. That's what we're seeing. That we're seeing a doubling down on the dumb across the board, and you can tell that what you see when a culture collapses, according to the Apostle Paul in Romans 1, and we come at this from a constitutional, conservative, Christian worldview. According to the Apostle Paul in Romans 1, when you see a culture collapsing, you see that professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Common sense would tell you that you protect the vulnerable and everyone goes back to work. You accept your own mortality, but you don't shut down society. That's what we did for over 2,000 years of recorded history. And you roll the dice. You deal with the risk. Life is full of risks. Tomorrow is guaranteed to no man. We'll close with that. But the later. But we're trying to save ourselves from death because we want to enjoy our stuff longer. That's a wicked and depraved generation that is in need of revival. And right now, you're seeing it's revival or bust. And right now, if the church isn't revived in the West, and if America doesn't drop to its knees, then the excommunications will continue until morale improves. Another story. I find this from Fox News, and once again, this is in your backyard, JJ, but we're finding out that there's been a lot of dumb. This is even more dumb. The Chicago Tribune editorial board blasts the Illinois Senate's rotten request for $41.6 billion in a federal bailout as, quote, shameless. The editorial board of the Chicago Tribune has repeatedly slammed the Illinois Senate's request for a whopping $42 billion federal bailout as the state's financial troubles continue to grow amid the coronavirus outbreak. The board said in an editorial piece that ran in the Tribune on Friday, "Let us stipulate that Don Harmon, rookie president of the Illinois Senate, laid a rotten egg with his recent letter asking members of Congress to give $42 billion at their request. Assorted politicians and pundits have scorned Harmon's inclusions of a $10 billion pension bailout for state workers, as if a sudden pandemic created a pension crisis that, in fact, Harmon and his fellow Springfield, Illinois lawmakers spent decades creating. The board said that taxpayers across the country should not be responsible for Illinois' financial mismanagement, particularly its unfunded pension liabilities. They also knocked Governor J.B. Pritzker for offering no solutions to his proposed state budgets, only to wait for money from the feds and from federal taxpayers. Pritzker should be re-examining expenses and payroll and weighing furloughs for state workers, negotiating with state labor unions to pull back or at least delay pay increases during a pandemic that will cause mass unemployment, that is scheduled to ship hundreds of millions of dollars in raises to workers who are now largely staying home. Instead, there continues to be no appetite for reducing spending, only asking for more money from taxpayers. The coronavirus will be the reason that we expect that Governor Pritzker will make it even harder and will push for his graduated income tax, as revenue losses have become deep and painful. But for that and many other reasons, voters must reject the pressure of sending more money to Springfield through a graduated income tax, and a plea for a bailout with no admitted responsibility on the part of the politicians who got us here should give voters another reason to vote these people out. Your thoughts on that, JJ, as that is in your backyard?
Well, for those of you who don't know, Illinois is not exactly known for honest, upstanding politicians.
Just a touch.
We've got two of the governors in my lifetime, Blagojevich and Ryan, federal prison. Blagojevich was recently pardoned, stupidly. Rauner, we didn't have a budget for most of his last term. JB did come in, and one of his promises, and we did get one after 400 days, so praise to him there. But yeah, you can't turn around for years of mismanagement. We had to take out a $10 billion loan, actually it's $9 billion, to pay off a chunk of the $14 billion in debt the state already was, just to stop the interest from going up roughly $500 million every year, just to slow down the interest rate. And we shouldn't rely on everybody else to get us out of that. And, you know, Rauner had to be told by a federal judge they were just going to cancel all the pensions. Rauner was going to be investigated, but now with COVID, he and his cronies got away scot-free. Someday we'll talk about that. But no, in this case, the Tribune is right. We'll go biblical here. Proverbs 22, 7 and 8. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Whoever sows injustice will reap calamity, and the rod of his fury will fail. And that's backed up by James in the New Testament, James 2:6. But you've dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich the one who oppress you, and the ones who drag you into court. And so, in this instance, any fondness I have for anyone up the top, I'm like, no, you, much of the Senate and the legislatures, JB aside, you've been here for decades. Some of you win because nobody runs against you, which that is just terrible. No, you need to start owning your debt, owning your mistakes, and repent and make changes, you friggin' heathens.
Speaking of tyranny from the heathens, we have a quote and a clip from Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan as she went full political Jezebel. It was uncanny to watch as she doubled down on the tyranny as citizens protest her insane overreach, saying, I'm not going to sign any bill that takes authority away from me.
It's a crisis where lives are
and I want
on.
you to hear that quote from her, and here it is.
With regard to any of the blatantly political conversations about taking executive power away from my office, I'm just going to reiterate for I don't know how many, the umpteenth time, I'm not going to sign any bill that takes authority away from me or from any future governor. The powers of the executive office are incredibly important, especially in times of crisis where lives are on the line. And I don't know that I've got much more to say on that.
JJ, your thoughts on that as Gretchen Whitmer just comes out and says, goes full Emperor Palpatine, as you alluded to earlier, and says, I am the Senate.
Yeah, and I was gonna, and you robbed me of my moment of thunder here. I was gonna say, great is Diana, Artemis of the Ephesians. That's what she wants. She wants
praise from the pagans.
Yeah, she wants praise. She wants the power. She's the tyrant. She's the basically sort of the feminine version of Palpatine. I had a thought here, but I lost Lilith, man. I mean, it's full on demonic evil. It's a Jezebel leading the king astray and sacrificing just everybody. And then, it's going to take a spirit of Elijah in the case of Jezebel to counter all of the falseness that she's going to do. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and many of your viewers may not like this. Just because she's female doesn't automatically disqualify her as a leader. It's the fact that she wants all the power and wants to. I mean, she outlawed seeds, man. Do you know what that means? Oh, now that you can't get a job and go buy food, and now that the pork producers and the beef producers are starting to run out of food, you can't plant your own and take care of yourself. I have to mute or I'm going to swear.
I'm with you. That was a great way to say it. She is drunk on her own power. She's obviously trying to make a power play, as she is on a short list of those being considered as Joe Biden's VP nominee. And she obviously thinks that this is good for her political future. I would say that now that 1 out of every 4 Michiganders is unemployed, and she's now stopping you from being able to travel between house to house, and now she's coming out and saying, I'm the emperor. You're not going to take power away from me. I can do what I want. Going full Eric Cartman, whatever. I can do what I want. She's drunk on power, drunk on tyranny. And that should be very, very disheartening, alarming, eye-opening to the people in the state of Michigan. And I think that that's why you saw such massive protests when it came to Operation Lockdown in Lansing last week. And then she threatens on the Today Show the next morning that because of those constitutional rights given protests, the right to peaceably assemble and air your grievances, that because of that, she could extend the lockdowns. It's just doubling down on the dumbassery. And I keep saying that. We're seeing it on display over and over and over again. People drunk on power, and they want control. They eat it up, and it's a spirit of wickedness. It's a spirit of political whoredom, and it's a Jezebel-like spirit that we're seeing, this type of wickedness in the high places. But I digress. We go to the UK Daily Mail. UK Daily Mail Online tweets out yesterday, Swedish expert says a lockdown may not have saved lives because 50% of the deaths in Sweden from coronavirus have come from in-care home facilities. Sweden sees a record number of infections for a second straight day in a row after warning its people it may have to close bars and restaurants if people keep ignoring social distancing. But they're also saying that they're seeing half their deaths are coming from prevented care home facilities. That's shocking, absolutely shocking, JJ, that half the deaths, at least 50% of the death toll, has come from elderly homes, and they have a hard time understanding how a lockdown would have helped to stop the introduction of the disease. Quote, we already had a law making it illegal for visitors to come to elderly homes. They need constant care. They need lots of people coming and going to take care of them. And it's a very difficult question to answer at this stage. So it's a bit unclear to us if a lockdown really would have helped this from happening or not. It's a difficult question that I don't think we have the answer to, and I'm not sure we'll ever get the answer completely. That was a quote from Swedish state epidemiologist Anders Tegnell to the BBC. Your thoughts on that, JJ?
And my closing comments will be on this more directly, but sadly I'm not shocked that that's occurring, because if it's in more people than we expected and been around a little longer than we expected, even a month longer, your lockdowns came too late anyway for a lockdown measure to work. Two, as they said, there's constantly, even if you stop visitors from coming, there's constantly ins and outs, and people have to go to the grocery store. And, what I have to literally, when I come home from the grocery store, I take off my clothes, throw them in the wash, and take a shower, because I work with a group of constituents. But that's not a thing people think. And there's a county near me, DuPage County. For those of you who don't know, Cook County is Chicago. DuPage County is one of the suburb next right door, or Aurora, I think, is south of it, but it's right there. It's had 100, as of Friday, it had 118 deaths, 83 of them. So 118 total deaths, 83 were in elderly care facilities. It's not, that area of the population is extremely vulnerable. And those who have compromised immune systems, which if you're over the age of 70, 60, you start to 70 for sure, you're starting to get compromised. And we need to take it seriously, but we need to take it strategically. That's what I'm going to say.
I would agree. This is interesting. We find this morning from foxnews.com. Now, we remember that Wisconsin went ahead with its April 7th Democratic primary. I think that was the last primary that was done in the Democratic cycle before Bernie Sanders dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden. But Wisconsin saw no coronavirus infection spikes after the April 7th election, the study says. A fear of a spike in Wisconsin's coronavirus infection rate following its April 7th in-person presidential primary never materialized, although some new cases of the virus were possibly linked to the election, according to a report from the Wisconsin State Journal of Medicine. A team of doctors from Wisconsin and Florida, plus a mathematician in Alabama, examined data from the post-election period from April 12th to April 21st, meaning 5 to 14 days after the election, when new cases of the virus from April 7th likely would have become apparent. Prior to the election, Wisconsin's coronavirus infection rate was about 1/3 the rate of the entire U.S. and dropped even lower when compared to the U.S. after the election, the study said. Our study does not find any significant increase in the rate of new COVID-19 cases following the April 7th, 2020 election post-incubation period for the state of Wisconsin or its 3 major voting counties, as compared to the United States, the researchers wrote in their paper. A reduction in daily new cases in Wisconsin, that rate was observed, and compared to what would have been expected if the rates in Wisconsin had followed pre-election ratios. Our initial hypothesis of an increase in COVID-19 activity following the live election was not supported. JJ, this is also in your neck of the woods because Wisconsin is the bordering state to Illinois. Milwaukee and Chicago are basically half an hour to 45 minutes away from each other. This is right back in your neck of the woods. This is interesting data that we did not see a spread of coronavirus in what we're being told is the coronavirus-laden air of the United States. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we need to start looking at the data now. I mean, we've been, what, 2 months now, give or take, depending on the state you're in and where you're at. We need to start taking a look at this stuff and making surgical, intelligent, rational decisions. Some areas, hospitals, elderly care facilities, my type of facility, yeah, those things need to stay on a tighter leash. But you know what? We've done that for flu seasons. Sometimes we've had to shut down for a week or two because we're a care facility. But we have to make that decision. Do we get information from the health department and the CDC and, unfortunately, the WHO? Yes. But we make the decision, not them. If this was we're talking like a real plague, like a third of the people in a county are dead, like in a couple weeks, yeah, that's when you bring in the National Guard and they wear hazmat. So you've seen the movies, you know what would go on, but that's not happening in most places. Here, New York City's having a bit of a bad go, to say the least. Aren't they putting the bodies are now in like refrigerated trucks now, aren't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, and there was a story that we talked about in our practice run, that there's 7 strands now, 3 primary, and the third one is the one that came from Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan to Italy, now into New York. And that's where that's at and almost nowhere else. Yep. And so you're just kind of like, okay, that furthers the surgical strike-ness. All right, nobody in and out of New York City, or that area there. That's that area,
Dare I say, no, the phrase is more true now than when it was uttered in the movies. But when it comes to New York City, this town needs an enema. It needs a good cleansing. And I think that we can't use what's happening in New York City to dictate policy and decisions and procedures across the rest of the country. Case in point, there are 27,000 people per square mile in the 5 boroughs of New York City. South Dakota, there's only 11 people per square mile. So South Dakota isn't New York City. New York City is a human sardine can. People are stacked up like human kindling. So obviously it's going to ravage itself and spread itself at a faster rate in that type of an urbanized area than it is in a rural area. And that's just common sense. But sadly, we're finding out that there's a lot of common sense that's lacking in today's society when it comes to covering what it is that we're seeing today.
Yeah. And I mean, not to make light of it, but my dad always told me, never go to New York. Nothing good will come from there. Well, alrighty, I guess. But you can't take, especially if it's a totally different strand and it's more virulent and more deadly across the board than what's happening in the other 49 states. Or I guess New Jersey's got some of that strand too in your neck of the woods. But again, okay, so outside of New England, let's get surgical. Let's get intelligent. There's a way to find a balance, not to go Buddhist on you, but there's a way to do this moderately, all things in moderation. Be discerning, and we're not doing it.
It's true. It's absolutely true. This coming from our friends at Discern News, which is the news outlet that is co-founded along with the Babylon Bee. Adam Ford of DISRN.com, linking to a story that came out from Al Jazeera. The Muslim call to prayer, otherwise known as the Adhan, will echo from loudspeakers through parts of Minneapolis 5 times per day for the entirety of Ramadan, in what is believed to be the first time the Islamic call to prayer has been publicly broadcast in a major U.S. city, according to reports from Al Jazeera. Recited by different representatives from mosques around the city, the call to prayer is expected to reach thousands in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood in Minneapolis, according to Jailani Hussein, the executive director of Minnesota's Council on American Islamic Relations. We have video of the first call that went out late Thursday. I want to play it for you.
Thank you for quiet singing. Thank you for quiet singing.
Well, that clip did not work, but we hear the call to prayer in the clip. There you go. An English translation saying Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest. I bear witness that there's none worthy of worship but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Hurry to prayer, hurry to prayer, hurry to salvation. The noise, a noise permit was granted by the city for the broadcasts. There's a lot of excitement, said Imam Abdusalam Adam, who would be broadcasting the Adhan, saying some people see it as historic. It should be noted that the area of Minneapolis blasting the call to prayer is the district of controversial Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar. JJ, your thoughts on that as we begin to see an open display of blatant paganism in a strong, large U.S. city?
Well, first of all, a correction. It's not paganism, because paganism is they don't know of Christ. Muslims know of Christ. They deny him. It's heretics, heresy. They're heretics.
Fair enough.
Big difference. One goes to hell knowingly. The other doesn't. Just kidding. Anyway, all seriousness is... Okay, so here's the ruling. Okay, now that they're saying that out loud, ISIS can go away now, right? The terrorists, they've won, right? They can... It's here now. Islam is now the state religion of Minnesota. They can go away now, right? USA is no longer a threat. Nope, not going to happen. Where is the bells tolling then? Are the bells allowed to toll? Are they playing a bell chime for Christian services on Sundays and Saturdays? Jewish holidays are also happening roughly during this time. If you're going to separate church and state, you either do nothing or you got to provide for all, right? Am I wrong?
That's absolutely right. I don't think we're going to be hearing any church bells ringing. I don't think you heard any Passover or Easter calls to prayer in Minneapolis for the Messiah or the risen Savior. But when it comes to worshiping Allah and claiming Muhammad as his prophet, then we're going to bend over backwards for a person whose district she said that 9/11 was some people who did some things.
And there are 2 billion some Muslims in the world, and a lot of them do it peaceably. But yeah, most of those Muslims live in a state of either tyranny or are really, really, and I mean really, 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 really rich. So it's easier to be peaceable when you're, it's good to be the king, as Mel Brooks once said.
It's true. So that was disconcerting. Also, some concerning news as well is that Discern News also reporting that church giving is down more due to COVID-19 than during the Great Recession, a survey finds. According to a new survey, church giving is down more due to the COVID-19 pandemic than during the Great Recession of 2008. The State of the Plate survey conducted by the National Association of Evangelicals between April 8th and April 20th revealed that 65% of U.S. churches have reported a decline in giving since mid-March after in-person services were shut down due to the coronavirus pandemic. The survey asked 1,091 mostly Protestant church leaders how COVID-19 lockdowns have affected churches' givings. 34% reported giving had dropped between 10 to 20%. 22% said declines sat between 30 to 50%. 9% said giving had dropped by 75% or more. Only 8% of churches said that their giving had increased. Only a quarter, 27%, reported that their giving had remained steady. According to author and speaker Brian Kluth, who developed the State of the Plate survey after the 2008 Great Recession, said what's surprising is the findings are much deeper and far more far-reaching than what happened in the recession. This is now a major short-term shift, but a major shift in the financing of churches in America right now. In comparison, the 2010 State of the Plate survey revealed that 38% of churches reported that giving was down in 2009 compared to 2008, while 35% said giving was up and 27% said that contributions had remained steady. JJ, your thoughts on that as we find out that as we slide into another Great Depression, we're struck by more fear, and our giving has now fallen as we now cower in the shadows, wondering what we're going to do next.
I'm going to step up on a soapbox here for a moment, and I wish I had a camera so you could see my expressions.
You will be getting a camera soon, but
yes.
But we're making do with what we've got right now. But go on.
You feckless, cowardly, two-faced, sheep-humping weaklings. How can you say you worship the God of the universe, the Savior of all mankind, and then you're not even going to show up, and you're not going to give him anything to support him? Wheat from chaff, and you're going to get reaped. I'm done.
I don't think that there's anything more that you have to say. I would agree. I have no problem with people increasing. I have no problem with the giving staying the same. But I do have a problem with people that are pulling back. You still give to the Lord when there's plenty and when there's lean, because the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. But blessed be the name of the Lord. That is an "O ye of little faith" type moment. And sadly, a Barna study group had said back in 2010 that we were on a pace that half of the churches in America would shut their doors by 2050. I think that has been exacerbated and sped up considerably because of this second Great Depression we're going to enter into, and the fact that we're not giving is an utter display of our lack of faith, which also ties into the fact that we continue to not go to church and to not openly just civilly disobey and go to our houses of worship. I mean, Muslims can have open calls to prayer, and that's fine. They can go to mosques, but you can't go to your church and worship your risen Lord on Easter Sunday. But the abortion mills continue to stay open, but you can't go to church. There's something wrong with that. Something wicked this way comes, Josh.
Right. And to add to that, you're right about the church closings, because I was searching for a church home and I had delayed that for a year, and that's on me, and I'll pay for that one before our mighty Lord at the end. But so many of them are like 10 or 12 people, or if you have a lot, people are like not over the age of 60. We're talking the majority are over the age of 70 or 80 with like a kid or two here or there, and they're not going to stay once they turn 18. You can tell they're just there. And what's that quote about being in church doesn't make you a Christian any more than being in your garage makes you a car, or whatever?
Yeah, it's the quote by G.K. Chesterton. Going to church makes you as much of a Christian as standing in a garage makes you a car.
All right. Yeah. Sack up, people, or get reaped.
Well, we're going to end on some brevity and some levity, as we always do. And then I have my final thoughts. And then we will close up shop for today. But breaking news, a funny story that came out of my old neck of the woods in central Iowa from the NBC affiliate in Des Moines, WHO TV 13. A man was shot in the buttocks in Des Moines over the weekend. A man suffered non-life-threatening injuries when he was shot in the buttocks on Saturday. Police responded to the shooting on the 1300 block of East 17th Street around 2:15 p.m. However, police say the victim waited a while to call police after he was shot. The victim's name has not been released. Police are now searching for 2 young male suspects. Updates will be provided as more info is available. But talk about getting your butt reamed. I mean, just getting shot, and they don't know what the disturbance is. But then waiting a while to tell police, I got some shrapnel back here. I've got some cartridges of a Remington 22 in my behind. Can you help me out? That's hilarious.
Wrecked him. Damn near killed him.
Well, as we finish up, that was hilarious. Good on you, JJ, for that. That was hilarious. The way it should be. My closing commentary from Jordan Schachtel of Blaze Media. He said it best when it comes to these coronavirus shutdowns. The complete and total unquestioning and blind adherence to the lockdown mythos in other countries is cult-like, to the point that it's become a religion of sorts. Non-believers are named, shamed, and prosecuted. Herd mentality is very bad here, but it's worse abroad, even in quote-unquote free countries. And for skeptics of lockdown mythology, or those who haven't fully committed, they are virtually on their knees begging the government to give them a sliver of their freedoms back. These governments love their newfound power. I don't see them giving it back to the people anytime soon. Your way of life is under attack, America. And unless you stand boldly without wavering upon the hope that we confess, because he who promised is faithful, because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, and that when the Son has set you free, you are free indeed. Unless you believe in that, Ronald Reagan was right. I keep saying it before, and I keep saying it again. We will look at previous generations and tell them of what it was like in America when men were free. You need to stand up. You need to make your voice heard. You need to do it civilly. You need to do it respectfully. You need to do it nonviolently. But you need to disobey the governing authorities, because I'm not going to go full Romans 13, submit to the governing authorities over you. Paul did not submit to Nero. Moses did not submit to Pharaoh. Elijah did not submit to the 450 prophets of Baal or King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Peter and John did not submit to the council that told them to stop preaching the gospel. Neither should you. You need to be bold and remember the words of Joshua. God telling Joshua, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And then Joshua stood before the people and said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. One of our founding fathers, Patrick Henry, in the Virginia State House, cried out, 2 months before the Constitutional Convention, or the independent, or the ratifying of the Declaration of Independence, he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Now is a time for choosing, and the choice is up to you. Well, JJ, it has been great to have you on for a second podcast. We look forward to having you on in the weeks and months to come. But if you have any final thoughts, you can share them. Otherwise, it's time to wrap up.
My final thoughts: 1A, great final closing, 100% on the ball. And while you're standing up, remember there are vulnerable portions of the population, and the deaths in the elderly homes are way higher than the general population. 83 out of 118 in DuPage County. I don't even want to know when they get the numbers here in the county I'm in, because we're at 100 and some too. James 14, I'm going to paraphrase, James 14. You do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Please reach out to those friends and family members that have compromised immune systems or are the elderly and are vulnerable, because I truly feel that given how poorly this has been managed, you don't know, they could be gone tomorrow.
And you
Stay
mean
safe.
James 2:14?
James, well, I think it's 4:14. Yet you do not know. Yeah, I'm at 4:14.
4:14. Okay. James 4:14.
Yeah, 4:14.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. No problem. No problem. Just wanted to make sure.
But yeah,
it's
yeah,
James
reach out.
4:14. But yeah, I think that's important. You need to make sure that you call your loved ones and talk to them, especially people that are immunocompromised, people that are in care facilities, because you never know what tomorrow will bring. And if they are the most vulnerable, you need to reach out to them. Make sure that you're on a good rapport with them before it's too late. Well, JJ, thanks for joining us. And for all of you, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. You can find me at jhinton_ on Twitter. You can also email us at americaheldhostage@gmail.com. For JJ Knight, I'm Jon Hinton. That's the way it should be. Colossians 2:8.